This one comes from Sophie. She and her boyfriend, Jared, share a modest bungalow on a quiet cul-de-sac. It's the kind of street where everyone knows everyone. Lawns are tidy, porches are kept, and you can usually hear a neighbor mowing on a weekend. One weekend, Jared had to be out of town, and Sophie had some friends over for a low-key movie night. About halfway through the film, the doorbell rang. It felt off, late, odd. There were cars in the driveway, but no one on the porch when she peered through the tiny glass. They joked it was a prank and moved on. Later, hours after everyone left and the house had settled, the doorbell rang again, this time in a repeating, insistent way. Sophie called Jared. He was out celebrating and sounded drunk. He told her to stay inside and not open the door. She did what he said for a while, until a sound at the window changed everything. A soft, deliberate clicking and a knock combined with a voice calling through the glass. "Hey, anyone home? I need help." The man sounded close enough to be right outside. This time, Sophie called the police. The officers arrived and did a cursory check of the house. They left. Not long after, the doorbell rang again and banging echoed against the front. Another voice, different from the first, told her it was the police. Two officers were standing on the porch. When she opened, one of them simply walked in like he belonged there, then walked through the house without asking. He was brusque and dismissive, and Sophie felt belittled when her fear was treated like an inconvenience. The officer and his partner did a walk around and found nothing, so they left. Sophie slept badly, and then, later that day, while at a Halloween party helping set up, she was late leaving. She returned after the party to find an open window and the basement door ajar. A faint clicking sound, the same one she'd heard earlier, came from below. She looked down the stairs and a voice from the dark said, "You're finally home." Her instinct was to run. She slammed the door and banged on a neighbor's until someone answered. She called the police again. This time, with a witness, the officers did a more thorough search. They tore apart the whole house to check possible hiding spots, inside closets and behind furniture. They found no sign of forced entry and no one hiding. Still, the feeling of invasion wouldn't leave Sophie. She packed a bag and stayed with her sister until Jared returned. After that, the family installed locks and reinforced windows. For months, Sophie refused to be alone for long stretches. She double-checked every bolt before sleeping and woke at the smallest sound. Occasionally, she'd get jolted awake by the imagined creak of the door or the phantom knock at the window. And for a long time, she was convinced something had been living in that house's shadows. Whether a person or something else, she couldn't be sure. The scariest part for Sophie wasn't that the intruder was violent. She never saw him clearly. It was that someone had stalked the house, learned its rhythms, and tested the boundaries of what it would take to walk into her life. The police never found a lead. The feeling of being watched lingered long after the porch lights went back on. This one's from a friend I'll call Daniel. He works as a pharmacy tech at Ridgeview Medical Center in Northwest Alabama, the kind of job that keeps you awake more than the daylight does. He's the sort of guy who'll say he's fine until the exhaustion breaks him down. But the thing that happened to him wasn't just fatigue. It was something that crawled right into the edges of reality. Daniel works long stretches on a night rotation. On one particularly rough run of shifts, he'd been awake far longer than was smart. He finally caved and drove to his wife's aunt's house to crash. But sleep would not come. By the time he stumbled back to his job, he was running on fumes, energy drinks, adrenaline, the kind of dull focus you get when your brain is faking functionality. He was assigned to restock surgery rooms that night. The operating areas are clinical and echoing. They swallow sound until a dropped instrument seems huge. Daniel was in the rhythm of it, filling bins, organizing meds, when a door creaked and slammed in a way that set his teeth on edge. He turned, expecting the usual cleaning crew or a passing nurse. Nobody. He pushed on. Later, walking into another prep room with the light off, he thought he saw someone hunched over a disposal bin, the kind of bin where used syringes go. Twisting the light on, he half expected confrontation. Instead, the room was empty. The thought that maybe his mind was fraying crossed him, not because the sight was alarming, but because that exact thing had happened before elsewhere. People hiding in supply closets, trying to find opioids. It's a small, awful industry. Still, he shrugged it off and carried on. When he returned to the pharmacy to deliver meds to the floors, the building felt oddly empty. One wing had been under remodeling and the patients were moved. He decided to check in on that silent side just to make sure nobody needed anything. That's when the hospital showed him something his reasoning couldn't fit. A room window revealed an old man contorted over his bed, shaking and bleeding from the face, monitors screaming. The scene was horrific, a human being in distress like a movie special effect. Daniel froze, then stepped back, and every ethical bone in his body in motion, rushed to help. He turned, and then the room was clean. The monitors quiet, the bed made. Nobody had been there. He shook his head, told himself exhaustion was screwing with him. He rode the elevator down, and an older security guard stepped onto it, patted his shoulder, smiled, and rode up with the numbers ticking higher. Daniel watched the elevator lights until it reached the 5th floor, the same floor where he'd just seen the man. He didn't press the button for it to come back. When the carriage returned, it was empty. He sat in the pharmacy like a man who'd seen a ghost. He later learned that hallucinations from extreme sleeplessness can start to show around the time he was at. Tempting explanation number one. But even knowing the physiology didn't make the image any less disturbing. The man's mouth frothing, the monitor's frantic alarms, the way the shadow of him seemed to smear across the hospital green. After his shift, he got home and collapsed into a sleep deep enough to make the night's edges fray. He hasn't seen anything like that again. But sometimes late, when lights in the hospital clicks on in his memory, he still feels that little shiver of vertigo that says, maybe everything you consider solid is only a few hours away from melting. I want to tell you about one of those nights that still makes the hairs on my arms stand up. Back then I was barely out of high school, restless and hungry for anything that felt dangerous, exploring abandoned places, poking around old parks. I'd always liked being the person who laughed at the scary parts, the one who kept going after everyone else had turned back. That night things didn't go the way I expected. I'd been seeing a girl from one of my classes. Her name was Maya. She was quiet in a way that didn't feel closed off, more like someone with a secret you weren't supposed to know yet. It was the sort of connection that made you want to test the edges of what was normal. So, when I suggested we go for a midnight walk in the woods behind Willow Ridge Park, she agreed. By day, Willow Ridge is the kind of place where families picnic and joggers stretch their legs. At night, though, when the park shuts down and the street lamps stop, It becomes something else. The pines swallow sound, and the paths turned into black rivers. We walked without flashlights at first. I like the dark. It keeps your senses sharp. We followed the main path for a while, half joking, half carrying the hush, between two people who were both a little too curious about being scared. We knew a narrow offshoot trail that cut back toward the truck, a shortcut, the kind only local kids know. We took it. Not long into that narrower track, something happened that felt off. The second I heard it, a flute started playing. It was a single steady note at first, and then a line of melody. It wasn't random, it had rhythm. It sounded almost gentle, until you realized how wrong it was to hear music in the middle of those dark trees. Maya froze. Her breath went short. For a second, I thought maybe some weirdo had brought a recorder for ambience, an urban explorer's joke. But the sound didn't come from a campsite or a human voice. It threaded through the pines like smoke. At first, the tune was distant, as if someone were playing way off the trail. Then it moved, or seemed to, until it felt like the notes were all around us. Maya went quiet and started whispering prayers. I remember thinking, don't panic, because that's what you tell yourself when there's nothing else to do. We ran. We hadn't gone more than a few dozen paces when something thundered across the path in front of us. A heavy, sudden dash that shook the leaves. I expected to see a deer silhouette, a raccoon, anything tangible. Instead, we heard that heavy motion and saw nothing. No shadow, no shape, just the sound right where a body ought to have been. We spun and bolted back the way we'd come, hearts beating in our mouths. When we reached the point where the flute had started, it began again. This time so close it felt like someone was standing behind us, playing notes into our shoulders. It wasn't loud, but the cadence was all wrong for any human I'd ever heard. It slid between being cheerful and menacing without warning, like a warped nursery tune. We were backed into a choice that felt like a trap, dart into the darker side trail where whatever had dashed before could be waiting, or run along the main trail where the notes seemed to be coming from. I picked the cement path and we sprinted. During those minutes it felt like the woods held their breath, and the music stopped being music. It became a thing hunting rhythm. When we finally hit the truck and peeled out of that parking lot, I didn't speak. I drove until the quiet of the road numbed us both. The next day, we scoured forums, talked to older hikers, and tried every reasonable explanation. Pranksters, nearby house windows carrying music on the breeze, some bizarre wildlife noise. Nothing fit. The flute was too precise, too melodic, and whatever had run across that trail had made no other sound and left no trace. I never went back at night. Maya moved away soon after. Different reasons, but maybe she'd had enough of the dark, too. The weirdest part is how, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the melody. Not whole songs, just curled fragments of notes that don't belong anywhere but those pines.